Welcome to the Eureka series podcast. Well, it's actually not a podcast, it's a YouTube presentation. This is part 2 of the Eureka series, and obviously the main reason we are doing this 2-part series is because Eureka Day is on the 3rd of December, and this year we will not be having the 16th hour marathon we normally have, but we'll be having a modified Eureka celebration to mark the 166th anniversary of the Eureka Rebellion. Now, last week we actually got up to the point where the diggers swore the Eureka Oath. We swear by the Southern Cross to stand truly by each other and fight to defend our rights and liberties. So on the 29th of November 1854, the diggers who swore the Eureka Oath swarmed into the Eureka diggings, which are now at the corner of the old corner of Eureka and Stall Street in Ballarat, and they set up the Eureka Stockade, which was about an acre in size. The next day they started to train. There were about 2,000 men and women in the Eureka Stockade, who were broken up into divisions, and they were trained for the following fight with the British authorities. Now, the 3rd of December 1854 was Sunday, and most of the diggers left the Eureka Stockade that day and went back to their tents because they didn't actually believe that the authorities would attack them on the Lord's Day, Sunday. At 4 a.m. on the 3rd of December, the 40th Regiment and the 12th Regiment and 96 mounted police, a total of over 240 men on horseback, made a surprise attack on the stockade. At that particular point in time, there were about 100 diggers left in the stockade. They rallied, and the pikemen, who were the men who didn't have arms but had long pikes, which were used by rebels all over the British Empire to attempt to cut the horses' bridles and dismount riders, faced the onslaught. Over half of the 30 men who were in the pike brigade lost their lives that morning. Others were shot indiscriminately. Within 15 minutes, the Eureka Stockade had been overrun. But what the pikemen did is they gave the rest of the people in the stockade the ability to escape and disappear into the surrounding tents. Now, the British soldiers were relatively well disciplined, and once the Eureka flag had been ripped down from the flagpole, which the rebels had erected, they spent most of their time rounding up prisoners. The Victoria Police went on a rampage which lasted over 3 hours. It was a rampage of murder, looting and burning tents. They were looking for gold, they were looking for revenge. So many authorities talk about the Eureka Rebellion as the Eureka Massacre. And the Eureka Massacre occurred after the rebellion had been put down, or so the authorities thought. The British authorities under Hotham believed that this was the end of the situation, that had overrun the Eureka Stockade, the Ballarat Reform League had been destroyed. The Chartist demands which were made by the Ballarat Reform League, which revolved about universal male suffrage, was no longer an issue. But what happened in the next 24 hours was extraordinary. The whole of Victoria rose up in arms. Everybody believed that it could have been them. What happened was, in Melbourne, the Lord Mayor called a public meeting in order to congratulate the troops. and the police. Over 6,000 people stormed that meeting. Around Victoria, in the next 24 to 48 hours, there was talk of a general uprising. There were protests in Geelong, in Bendigo, in Castlemaine, and most of the major settlements in Victoria. Although martial law had been declared, the authorities realised they had made a grave mistake, because all their soldiers, most of their police, most of their armaments were in Ballarat. So there were no authority in the rest of the state. And this was a decisive moment in the Eureka Rebellion, where a victory had been snatched from the jaws of defeat, because the diggers on the other goldfields around Victoria had the same demands as their brothers and sisters in Ballarat. So the government was forced to backpedal, to give the authorities time to not only bring Ballarat under martial law, but get troops and police back in the rest of the state. Over 112 men were arrested on that day. The death toll, we think, is over 60. Most were killed after the battle. What happened then is that 13 of the 116 were taken to Melbourne and taken to the prison, the old jail, the old Melbourne jail, where they were mistreated and starved. The first trial occurred in February 1855, and the first man who was tried was John Joseph. John Joseph was a freed slave who'd come to Ballarat from New York to find his fortune. He was a black man, and the authorities believed that no white jury would acquit a black man of the murder of Captain Wise, the deputy commander of the military forces, who was shot by John Joseph as he attempted to storm the barricade and died 6 weeks later of his wounds. So John Joseph was placed before the jury, and he was acquitted by an all-white jury. He was acquitted in record time. He was chaired through the streets of Melbourne, where over 25,000 people, many armed, had gathered to ensure that justice was done on the 22nd of February 1855, the trial of John Joseph's. Men who were tried came from all corners of the globe. There were Jews, another black man from Kingston, Jamaica, Prussians, Irish. All were acquitted, even one native-born Australian. All were acquitted. And within 12 months of the rebellion, the leaders of that rebellion were in Parliament. Henry Lalor, the leader of the armed faction, and Humphreys, the leader of the peaceful faction of the Ballarat Reform League, were both in Parliament, both elected. Raphael Carboni, a prominent member of the Ballarat Reform League, was also acquitted of high treason and was made a gold mining magistrate. Don't worry, it's not COVID-19, it's a bee. You can hear them in the background. Not pleasant, but that's it. I think it's gone to God. Or maybe not. So here we are in 2020, 160 years later. So what does the Eureka Rebellion have to do with you and me? Why is it important? Why has it been written out of the pages of Australian history? Why has the Eureka flag been usurped by different sections of society? Why have we forgotten what it was all about? Because the Eureka Rebellion set in train a series of events which made Victoria one of the most radical places on the planet, and by the beginning of the 20th century made Australia one of the most worker-friendly places on the planet. And that was due to the Eureka Rebellion, because the authorities realised they could not maintain order through force. They needed to democratise society. They needed to break down the power of the squatters. They needed to allow ordinary people to buy land. Now, many people say it's a white rebellion. Well, it's not a white rebellion. It was a rebellion that included people of all races, of all cultures, who spoke many languages, of all colours. It even included this country's indigenous people. Raphael Carboni wrote the first account of the Eureka Rebellion 12 months after it occurred, and on the first anniversary went back to Ballarat to hand out copies of his book. Raphael Carboni in 1853 lived with the local Aboriginal people in Ballarat. He lived with them. He was the first European who stated explicitly that they were the victims of British colonisation, that they had been dispossessed of their lands forcefully. And in his opera Gilbernia, he highlights this. And on the morning of the rebellion, you can imagine the smoke, the fire, the screaming, the dying. On the morning of the rebellion, women jumped the barricades and draped their bodies over wounded diggers who they didn't know, to stop them being bayoneted to death by the Victoria police. You can imagine children running away from the smoke and the fire, lost in the crowd. The local Aboriginal people in Ballarat gathered the children and kept them for up to 24, 36 hours until they could be reunited with their parents. So this is a story that incorporates all of Australians. It's a story that's important to all of us. In 1855, when universal male suffrage was introduced, many radicals believed that the parliamentary reforms that were put in place were not enough, and they set up an alternative parliament which was based on the delegate system, not on representation at the southern markets, which was less than 70 metres from where Parliament House stands, at the corner of Exhibition and Burke Street. Less than 70 metres. And that alternative parliament met regularly for over a decade. And some of its members were also members of the Victorian Parliament, elected by the people of that state. And let's not forget, Victoria is at the forefront of radical reform. In 1876, it was the first place in the world which introduced 3 secular compulsory education. And within a year of that law being introduced, over 700 schools were built across Victoria for children who would never have gone to school. It was a place where for decades they fought to break the stranglehold the squatters had over their land. So what we celebrate is not some historical reenactment. What we celebrate is the essence of the Eureka Rebellion. And as I said last week, the essence of the Eureka Rebellion is wrapped up in the Eureka Oath. We swear by the Southern Cross to stand truly by each other and fight to defend our rights and liberties. An extraordinary oath signed in 1854. And those of you who have witnessed the United States election and the fact that over 70 million people voted for a liar and a cheat and a fraudster and a misogynist and a racist and a tax evader will understand that the sentiments in 1854 were much more important than what we see today, 166 years later. And they were based on 4 principles. Internationalism, everybody. Internationalism, we. They were based on direct democracy. People making decisions by mass meetings, electing and appointing delegates to coordinate those decisions. They were based on solidarity. People coming together to fight their common oppression despite the colour of their skin, despite the language they spoke, despite where they came from. And it was based on direct action. What is more direct than taking up arms to defend your rights and liberties? Now, these people didn't believe that governments gave them rights and liberties. They believed they were born with inalienable rights and liberties, which no government could take away, which no employer could dilute and take away. So the lessons of 1854 are as relevant in 2020, 166 years later, as they were 6 years ago. They are relevant today. And it's a pity that in this country and around the world that people have forgotten these lessons. Australians have forgotten the Eureka story. The Ballarat people have forgotten the Eureka story. The Ballarat City Council has forgotten the Eureka story. It has never flown the Eureka flag on the main flagpole on the Ballarat City Hall in the 166-year history of Eureka. On the 3rd of December, there will be a few of us who will be celebrating those basic principles: internationalism, direct action, direct democracy and solidarity. We will be paying our respects to the men and women involved in that struggle. We'll be paying our respects to those who died. As I said before, because of the COVID-19 crisis and because of limited mobility and because of restrictions, the celebrations will not be from 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. They will include the dawn ceremony from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Currently, we are not sure about the numbers that we'll be able to have, but you're invited to come and attend. We can always break up into smaller groups if we have to. We'll also, at midday, we'll be meeting at the Old Ballarat Cemetery at the grave of those diggers, at the graves of the 22 people who are buried in that mass grave, about less than half of those who died on the day. We'll be there to pay our respects. We will be there to highlight the importance of Eureka 166 years later. Because not just in the United States of America, where 70 million people are so alienated that they are willing to vote for a liar, a fraudster, a misogynist, a racist, a tax evader. But also in this country, we see the same disease sweeping this country, where people try to divide us on the basis of race. They try to divide us on the basis of our identity. They try to divide us on the basis of our sexual preferences. They try to divide us on the basis of our origins. So Eureka is relevant. It is relevant today. It's more relevant in 2020 than it was in 1854. I encourage you to celebrate on the day. Whether you're at Ballarat or not doesn't matter. Eureka is universal. Make a Eureka flag. Fly a Eureka flag. Talk to your friends and neighbours about why you're taking the day off on Thursday, the 3rd of December. let's celebrate a day that is worthwhile in this country. Because the other two major days are really days that divide us. Invasion Day, the 26th of January, Queen Lizzie's birthday of all things in 2020. So I'm saying to you, those people who formed the Ballarat Reform League still live. The ideas they fought and died for are still relevant. They are more relevant today than they were in 2020. So remember, if you can come to Ballarat on the 3rd of December, we will be observing whatever COVID-19 restrictions are in place on that particular day. We'll have a dawn ceremony from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. We'll be meeting at the Old Ballarat Cemetery next to the graves of the Eureka diggers at midday on Thursday, the 3rd of December. Next week, who knows what we're going to talk about.